Now, Evelyn Campbell enters the Johann Hoch story on Tomb Snoopers. All right, welcome once again to Tomb Snoopers. Patty, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm, getting ready for winter, I guess, is now the...
Oh, yeah, we got snow coming in the morning, it sounds like,
Yeah.
Well,
it is Chicago.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's after Thanksgiving. It's about time, and I just got some nice new boots while I was in Leeds.
Oh, nice.
Well, I got to Leeds. It was raining like crazy, and the water was coming into my shoes. I'm going to have to buy some. And there's the Doc Martens store right there.
Oh, that's perfect.
So, got these yellow rubber ones. They're wellies is what they are.
Okay.
And some guy came up to me in a public, "You're making wellies look cool, Mike."
Oh, that's great.
So, all right.
Great.
So, okay.
High praise.
Yeah, high praise indeed. I didn't know wellies were uncool. I guess we don't really encounter them enough around here stateside, perhaps. So, all right, moving on back into the world of Johann Hoch. We are at the point where we've covered how the newspapers first discovered the story, or were first hipped to the story, perhaps. Now, we really have to move into... There are a couple of reporters who had particularly outsized roles in this, which is a kind of a new concept, because in previous killings, there was not really individual bylines. So there'd be these long-winded articles about H.H. Holmes. Maybe you never know who wrote them. They could be, and even then it's often kind of a composite in those days. You'd have the leg person going out to get the data, the rewrite guy would write it out, and the typesetter might change it up a little bit. But one particular one, probably the most consequential one of all, was a woman who worked for the Chicago American named Evelyn Campbell. Now, for one thing, Hearst believed that women writers brought in women readers, and that was very good for business on his part. So his women reporters tended to get individual bylines and pictures next to the articles and everything, which was something that the men almost never got, especially in those days. They were kind of the stars. About a decade before, you'd had the things with like Nellie Bly and what they had come to call stunt reporting, where they would like get themselves locked in an insane asylum or just pass out on the street to see what happened.
Oh my God! Okay. I knew about Nellie Bly, but okay.
Yeah, they tended to give them names like Our Little Girl Reporter and stuff. So that era kind of ended with the Spanish-American War. But Hearst believed that women reporters brought in women readers. He was also very good about bringing in experts. Just before the Hoch case had been the first automobile murder. And that happened, was a guy rented a car in the auditorium building here in Chicago, down at what is now Ida B. Wells and Michigan Avenue. Some mysterious man known only as Mr. Dove rented a car, and with it you got a driver named Charlie Bate. So, in those days, in 1904, nobody knew how to drive an automobile, so you had to get a driver to come with it. The next morning, they found the car out kind of by Joliet, with Charlie Bates slumped over dead.
What?
No sign of Mr. Dove, no sign of a motive or anything. But the best anybody could guess was maybe they drove all the way out there, then the guy said he couldn't pay, so Charlie Bates said, okay, well, I won't drive anymore then. So Mr. Dove shot him in the head, which wouldn't have helped him one bit.
No, not at all.
So in the course of all of the investigations, the Tribune, the American, brought in a woman named Mary E. Holland, who, you couldn't work for the police department as a woman at the time, I don't think. They had like police matrons and stuff. But she had gotten trained in the very new art of fingerprinting at Scotland Yard. So she was kind of working all by herself, really, but they would bring her in as a consulting expert now and then, and she wrote like an entire column for The American. It was like, okay, here's what I think happened. She examined the whole car and determined that there had been a third person in the car. And that would continue to be her whole thing, that there was some whole other battle, and there's probably another dead body lurking around someplace. And something that even the newspapers were doing about as good a job as solving cases as the police were at this point. I mean, the police didn't have any particular training in this kind of stuff. It was just a job, not a profession. Civil service was still a pretty new concept. So Evelyn Campbell was working for The American. I've got a list of some of her columns here. I collected as many as I could. For the few months before this, starting October, there was Evelyn on Pretty Girl Eloper. Trembling in fear, arrival officer from Iowa, girl eloper says, "Don't send me home." Next day there was one about the mother says eloping girl was hypnotized. Then she had an article on the evils of saloons, then one on an eloping wife, then several on a murder case called O'Shea, who would eventually be in jail along with Hoch. An article about whether toy soldiers made children cruel or not. That was
okay.
A little bit ahead of its time, but somebody had suggested, stop giving kids these toys of war. They'll turn them into cruel adults. So she wrote an article about that, consulted some experts, talked to the Bang sisters, who were a couple of women who did psychic portraits. They had her writing about just anything and everything at the time.
That's wild.
But something about the Hoch case just caught up with her imagination, I think. She took it on really as just kind of a one-day assignment, I imagine. She went and interviewed a couple of people who were supposedly victims of Hoch. She interviewed Emily Fisher, the last victim. And I think she found, for one thing, a lot of these women were more willing to talk to her than they were to talk to the police.
That makes sense.
They didn't have any women they could talk to at the police department, so Evelyn was somebody they were a little more willing to open up to. And after about a day of it, she did a whole article investigating matrimonial agencies, the point of which was avoid matrimonial agencies as you would a serpent. So she was interviewing people like Emily Fisher, people like Minnie Podolsky, who had gotten all of those other letters from Hoch, and Anna Hendricks especially. Anna Hendricks, she said she found especially smart and especially articulate. That may just be because she spoke better English than the other people. I'm not even sure that she was... I know that she spoke German, but I think the best evidence I've got is that she was born in Iowa. So she would have spoken very good English, whereas some of the others, it's kind of iffy. Hard to tell exactly how much English some of them spoke. The newspapers would generally translate, but a lot of them had grown up in Germany, had only lived here for a couple of years. It's like one person said Marie Walker probably didn't speak a word of English as long as she had lived here.
Okay.
So Evelyn started writing columns about this day after day. She went and talked with Inspector Shippey about this, and she first asked him, "Do you think he might be a hypnotist?" And he said, well, a hypnotist of brass and nerve, maybe. He was, but he learned all of his tricks of the trade from H.H. Holmes, and which was just him speculating, and Evelyn would eventually get caught up in all of that as well. Everybody liked playing Connect the Dots, and she started getting letters from people saying, "I knew both those men in that long ago time, and if I tell you my name, my life will not be worth a farthing." And this would eventually lead her into some troubles. She wasn't any more trained in this kind of stuff than the police were. But she started writing about this every day and telling people, all right, the hours I have spent talking with Inspector Shippey about this are the most absorbing hours as I have ever spent. I am going to stick by this case day by day. I will unravel the clues that even my untrained eyes see will drive us all through a labyrinth. Right. And, it's very flowery, early 20th century writing, but also saying, I'm going to find clues. If you have any clues, please write to me here. And the next, within a couple of days, the newspapers were publishing like little boxes saying, "Are you following Miss Campbell's Johann Hoch clues? The police are." Which is probably true. She was probably getting more data than they were. And eventually would be named kind of a special commissioner on the case. Okay. So what happened was, we got to move about here. She was doing this day after day for about a week. Right about at the end of the month, they discovered Liz Gerke. We talked about her a while ago. She had the place on Eugenie Street. She was the one who said, "I'll hypnotize you."
Right.
And he walked off without getting any money out of her or anything. But the police discovered her and his trunk of hypnotism books, which of course was a field day for reporters. They loved talking about hypnotism in newspapers and crime stories. You could just imagine the happy dances they were doing. But it ended up being overshadowed because while they were reporting on Liz Gerke, Hoch was captured alive in New York. Now, he had been there pretty much the whole time. He'd stopped and tried to talk Johanna Reichel into marrying him again. He'd apparently stopped in Philadelphia to see if the last woman he had married there, Carolyn Stryker, had died. But then made the rest of his way out to New York, got a place, got his usual hotel. There was one right where the World Trade Center is now.
Oh.
And he lived there for a day or so before getting a place at a boarding house on 47th Street. So it was up, just a little bit west of what is now Times Square. You can walk from there to Times Square easy. So he ended up in a boarding house owned by a woman named Catherine Kummerl. So Catherine, once again, I have no idea whether I'm pronouncing that correctly. There's no two articles spell her name the same way. But she ended up also being very quotable. She, as soon as he checked into this place, he started saying, why don't I help you with all these potatoes? And started peeling the potatoes and saying, maybe you should marry me. And she said, for one thing, he about ate me out of house and home of potatoes. He had never seen anybody eat so many more potatoes. Wow. And he would even say, I could eat about a bushel of these. Or I could eat about a bushel of these. I don't want to imitate his accent too much. We got to create the atmosphere at the same time. And she told him, I have been married 3 times before. I could get another husband if I want to, but I don't want to. She told one reporter the idea of making love to a man made her sick.
Oh, boy.
And of course, making love at the time didn't mean necessarily the same thing we think of when we knew that. It just means like flirting, really.
Yeah.
But she was running this boarding house, and she started saying things like, you remind me of Jack the Ripper.
Oh.
And so she knew something was up with this guy. He was like bugging her to get a piano put in. He was going through all of her medicine bottles. And the way she described it, he would often like take her wrists and rub his palms against her wrist while he stared into her eyes, which she later thought might be hypnotizing him.
Yikes. And creepy.
Yeah. So, and she started thinking, well, she'd been reading these newspaper stories in the New York American about that awful man in Chicago. And she started to get a little bit suspicious that maybe this was that awful man from Chicago. Then the next day, she was out riding on the train, saw somebody reading a newspaper holding it open, and there was the photograph that they had uncovered. It was Hoch's mugshot from a few years before, and said, yes, that's the man. So she went and bought a copy of the paper, went back and kind of like, compared the two again.
Yeah.
Then ran down the road to the police station. There was one on 47th, about a block and a half away, and went and say, I've got that Hoch fellow here. Now, the way that the newspapers reported what happened next is they said, initially they just said the police came right up to him and said, hello, Hoch. And he said, hello, my name's not Hoch, though. and it wasn't quite, when it came out in the trial, they talked to him a little bit longer before they got around to saying, hello, Hoch.
Right.
They chatted with him like, who are you? Where you been? How come you got all this stuff from Chicago in your hat? What's in your trunk over here? But then eventually decided that this is their guy, at which point they said, all right, hello, Hoch. And he said, oh, hello, but my name's not Hoch. He was very easy to catch in a lie.
Oh, my God.
So they arrested him, brought him down to a station down about where Greenwich Village is now. It would have been right across from the Puck building, which it's best known now for being the exterior shot of the office from Will and Grace, where Grace works. This building with a statue of Shakespeare's Puck, so known because it was the home of Puck magazine, the biggest humor magazine of the day. This was a few years before Cap and Billy's Whiz Bang came out, and a few decades before Mad Magazine. It was the Mad Magazine of its day.
Okay.
So while Hoch was there in jail, and while the newspapers got busy trying to figure out what to do next, he kind of crafted a whole new persona for himself.
Really?
One thing, that was kind of the way that he got along with women, was find out what they want and be that guy for a month.
A little malleable.
And yeah, he was, his personality changed quite a bit, and it would change again. But after he was captured, before the newspapers got a hold of him again, he decided to just be, maybe it was because he saw the Puck building, or maybe he just decided, okay, this is the way that the way to get out of this is just charm my way through it. And decided to become an absolute goofball. Now, thereafter, as soon as reporters started talking to him again, it was all jokes and laughs. Everybody started, comparing him to a German dialect comedian. Uh-oh. And they would say this, like, okay, Hoch, how come you married so many women? He'd, older women for Johann go crazy, yeah? Things like, so Hoch, are you an architect? So Hoch, you just asked for an architecture magazine. Are you an architect? No, the newspapers call me a butcher, and little gags like that. And people would liken him to a vaudeville comic all the time. So this was not a way that he had ever been described before. He was always, people described in different ways, but nobody had ever commented on him having a wonderful sense of humor. But now all of a sudden he was the biggest goofball there was. But meanwhile, back back in Chicago, meanwhile, back in Chicago, they were having inquests going on. They were starting to gather all of the various wives to have a talk. So there's actually a scene where Anna Hendricks, Emily Fisher, and Elizabeth Gerke all met each other at the police station. And Anna's first thing was, well, I never thought it would come to this. It's I love that. She opens with, well, I never. And the three of them had a nice little chat saying, Emily was saying, he got all of my money and disappeared. And Liz said, nope, he didn't get any of my money. I was too smart for that. And Anna said, he was too cute for me. He gave me, all I got for my $500 was a wave and a toodaloo or whatever he said.
Right.
A God be with you and a dolly gray wave.
Yeah,
so
a great way to have those shared notes.
Yeah, so it's very. I wish they had been a little more thorough transcribing the conversation between the three of them, but they just kind of chatted and then went and met with the coroner and Inspector Shippey and told the whole story of what had happened. And at the end of it, Evelyn Campbell and Anna Hendricks went off to New York together. Evelyn, again, had been made kind of a special commissioner on the case. And they said, well, if we're going to have him brought to Chicago, we have to establish that this guy in New York is the same guy that married all of these women. So they selected Anna Hendricks to be the one to do the identification. But I think partly just because, I think it was partly Evelyn's choice. Evelyn arranged to go to New York, arranged to take Anna along with her. This is really official business. I'm surprised there weren't more police present. I know Detective Michael Loftus of the Chicago Police went along at some point too. So they went all the way out to New York and they brought Hoch out in a lineup and to see if Anna could pick out which one of these guys was the man, just like in the movies. I don't know how often this actually happens, that they have people line up so they can pick out which one is the actual guy. But that's actually what happened here. They brought all of them out. Anna walked up and said, yes, I see him. Walked up and he said something like, I'm sorry, Anna.
Oh.
It's hard to say. It was transcribed several different ways. Like some of them, they're saying, Anna, you here? Or I'm sorry, Anna, or I don't know. Or most likely he said something in German, and none of the reporters spoke enough German to transcribe it accurately. They filled in what they thought he said.
Sure.
And over the course of the day, you read the difference, the 4 o'clock paper, the 6 o'clock paper, the sporting edition. The story gets revised a little bit as more details get cleared up. But she identified him, and that was kind of it for them. It was just a matter of a couple of days of paperwork before they could determine what was going on, before they could send him back to Chicago. Right. So this, strangely, is about the last time Anna Hendricks appears.
Oh.
After this, she just kind of vanishes from the story. There's a couple of references that she might have been present at the trial, but she wasn't called on as a witness or anything, and I can't figure out what happened to her after this. It's one of the big empty open spaces in the research is that I couldn't figure out what became of Anna Hendricks. She didn't give follow-up interviews after this. There was a story that she was living with some friends on the west side. There is a city directory from that year that has her still living at the location over by where the jail is now in Little Village. And that's really about it. She might have gotten married again and changed her last name without there being enough paperwork on it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a big. I've gone as far as going to Forest Home Cemetery and asking about the husband's plots, where there still is a gravestone for that Hoch apparently paid for, it's still out there. But yeah, she's this big gap in the story.
That's wild.
And at this point, Evelyn started having a chance to interview Hoch. But really, that's a whole other story that I got to prepare for a little bit better.
Okay.
So now we know that there's going to be he's admitted to bigamy, but started saying, some rascally lawyer convinced me that Mrs. Hendricks, my only other wife, had secured a divorce. So I guess they've got me on bigamy, but it was all a mistake. It's all a big misunderstanding. And there was one of the jokes that he pulled. They asked him, so you've never seen that woman before in your life? And he said, nope, I've never seen her. And they said, so, but she just identified you. And he said, the whole time I knew her eyesight was bad. And
wait a minute.
Then they said, but you just said, he's like, that's a joke, it's a joke. Do I have to explain everything to you?
Explain the joke.
Yeah, if you got to explain the joke, you're already losing. So right about now, I really want to bone up on this a little bit, because after this, there was a train ride clear across the country where they were joined by a lot of reporters, a lot of police officers. Everybody wanted to interview him. Evelyn was interviewing him all the way back. A woman named Frances Maul, who had worked for the American before, interviewed him all the way back. And over the course of this, newspapers were reporting on it breathlessly. This was the biggest story of the year so far, except for all the stuff that was going on in Russia at the time, which is a whole other thing. So, all right, that gets us up to about the 20-minute mark, where we've got a few more episodes to go on this before we get through the story. We're getting into the home stretch now. We've got Hoch capture. We'll have to do an episode on the train, maybe something about the trial and the various reprieves, but we're getting there. We're getting there. You can follow along on more on the Patreon. You can get the book, Chicago's Serial Husband, The Marriages and Murders of Johann Hoch. And all right, so we got to buckle in for the snow here.
Yeah, no kidding.
And we're at WCPT right now, where Patty has a show 5 to 7 weekdays. I'm going to sit in today. We started about 20 minutes, so it gives me just enough time to finish my coffee. So everybody, thanks a lot. I'm Adam.
I'm Patty.
And we'll see you next week on Tomb Snoopers. As always, there's lots more data, including all the stuff we've talked about today, over at patreon.com/tubesnoopers, plus early access and a whole lot more.